Hey everybody, Al Norker here for KastKing, and today I've got a little demonstration for you to demonstrate the difference between monofilament, braid, and fluorocarbon fishing lines in how much they'll stretch. You know, a common misconception is that fluorocarbon fishing lines don't stretch, or at least they don't stretch as much as monofilament. Well, that's not really very accurate. Fluorocarbon fishing lines will stretch. In fact, they might even stretch more than monofilament, depending on the brand, but it takes a little bit more energy, a little more shock value to get them to start stretching. And I've got a demonstration set up here today to show you that. So we're going to be testing 4 different types of line. This is a KastKing monofilament line. We also have a Pro Braid fishing line. We have our Kovert Fluorocarbon, and then we're also going to test Berkeley Vanish, which is another 100% fluorocarbon fishing line. Now, all of these lines are the same 12-pound breaking strength, so I needed those all to be very, very accurate and very, very similar to perform this test. We're also going to use a digital scale, and that digital scale is going to help us put the identical amount of pressure against each of these lines so that you can clearly see as accurately as I possibly can in this kind of a demonstration that the same amount of pressure will make lines stretch more or less than the others. Now, before we do the demonstration, let's talk a little bit about some of the real advantages of fluorocarbon fishing line, because there's a lot of those. And I'm not saying that the stretch is a disadvantage, but it's just a misconception that fluorocarbon lines don't stretch. The big advantages, of course, to all fluorocarbon, 100% fluorocarbon lines, is that they are virtually invisible under the surface of the water. That's really, really important for those subsurface techniques in very, very clear water or highly pressured finesse type situations. A fluorocarbon line can mean the difference between a great day and an average day. Now, it also means the difference between maybe going from 8-pound line up to 12 or even 15-pound line. You can use that larger diameter because it is virtually invisible and get a little more power in that line, maybe even a little bit more abrasion resistance than what you would normally be able to do with monofilaments. Another big advantage in fluorocarbon lines is that they sink much faster than monofilament. They're actually denser, heavier than water, so they'll actually sink fairly fast. Now, that can be very good if you're fishing subsurface type presentations, but if you're fishing topwater presentations, you definitely don't want to use a fluorocarbon line because it'll drag that bait down. That's when you'd want to go back and use either mono or a braid, which has a tendency to stay on the surface of the water. Now, one other big advantage of fluorocarbon lines is that they're extremely sensitive, right? They're not as sensitive as braided lines, but they're much more sensitive than monofilament. So they make a great leader combination with braided lines where you want to have extreme sensitivity, bite detection, if you will. Fluorocarbon lines really do that for you. So what I've done here is I've set up this board. It's measured out every inch so you can see how much stretch we have. I've got approximately 2 feet of line out here is all. I couldn't stretch it out to 20 or 30 feet, obviously. It's connected firmly at one end. There's another connection device at this end which we will connect our digital scale to, so that when I pull and put pressure on each of these lines, they can be, we can get exactly the same amount of pressure. And for this demonstration, I'm going to use 8 pounds of pressure against each of these lines to compare them the same. So we're actually going to start the demonstration today using a braid as a baseline, because we know braid doesn't hardly stretch at all. It's virtually stretch resistant. Then we're going to test against a traditional 12-pound monofilament. Then I'm going to show you the stretch in a Berkeley Vanish 100% fluorocarbon. And finally, I'll show you the same comparison with Kovert. Okay, so the first line that we're going to test today as a baseline is a zero stretch braided line. This happens to be Pro 12-pound yellow braid. You can see I've attached this little bobber stop right here on the line, and as I begin the process, that line, or that bobber stop, is going to be right at the 12-inch marks. We know we have a good starting point. Then I'm going to take my digital scale. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. Make sure that it's reading 0.0 pounds, so we have a good starting point. I'll connect that to the other end of the braid, and now I'm going to pull this braid. I'm going to stretch it up to 8 pounds. Right there is 8 pounds exactly, and you can see there is virtually zero stretch. And if I drop that down again to right at the 12-inch mark, put pressure on it, right back up to 8 pounds, there's virtually no stretch on a braided line. So the next line that we're going to test today is actually a 12-pound monofilament by KastKing. Again, I have a small bobber stop marking the 12-inch mark. My scale is zeroed out at 0.0 pounds, and I'm going to connect that to the other end. And now I'm going to, once again, you can see the bobber stop is right at the 12-inch mark, and I'm going to start putting pressure on this now till I reach 8 pounds. There it is right there, 8 pounds. And you can see we've stretched that now to about 13¼ inches. Okay, the next line we're going to test is Berkeley Vanish. This is a 12-pound, 100% fluorocarbon line. Again, bobber stop right here. I'm going to take my digital scale, make sure that it is zeroed, 0.0 pounds, and I'll connect that to the other end of that line also. Bobber stop is right on 12 inches, and now I'm going to stretch that line until I get 8 pounds of pressure. And look at this. You're seeing that fluorocarbon line. Now there's exactly 8 pounds, but it's stretched over to over 13½ inches, about 13.6 or 7 I'm estimating, but considerably more than what the 12-pound monofilament stretched. Okay, and finally, the last line that we're going to test is Kovert. 100% fluorocarbon in 12-pound test, same as the others. Again, we have a strike indicator, or excuse me, a bobber stop, right, marking 12 inches. I'm going to zero out this. There we go. We're zeroed out to 0.0 pounds on our digital scale. And I'll connect that to the other end, and we'll see what happens. So we're right at 12 inches. We're going to put pressure on that right up to 8 pounds, 7.5, and there's 8 pounds right there. And you can see the Kovert has stretched to just a touch over 13 inches, about 13¼ maybe. So it has a little bit less stretch than the Berkeley Vanish, slightly less than the 12-pound monofilament, but it does in fact stretch. And this is the example I wanted to show everybody, is that fluorocarbon lines, while they take a little more energy to get there initially, they do in fact stretch. Well, I hope that I've been able to clear up some of the misconceptions about fluorocarbon line and whether they stretch or not today. We know by example here that fluorocarbons do in fact stretch, unlike braided fishing lines. But you know, there's a lot of advantages of fishing fluorocarbon line, and actually the stretch is not a disadvantage either. It actually acts a little bit like a shock absorber, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. But the big advantage is virtually invisible under the surface of the water. Very, very important. It's virtually waterproof. So whether it's the first cast of the day or the last cast of the day, fluorocarbon fishing lines act just the same, where monofilament and braided lines actually absorb water. Fluorocarbon lines are very sensitive. Makes a great leader connection to a highly sensitive and stretch-resistant braided line. Fluorocarbons are perfect for that right there. And the final thing about fluorocarbon lines is that they sink very fast. So for those subsurface techniques, or if you want to keep baits lower in the water column, fluorocarbon lines are a great example of that. But again, don't use those for topwater baits because fluorocarbon has a tendency to drag that down in the water column a little bit. So there's the facts about fluorocarbon and whether it stretches or not. I'm Al Norwicker for KastKing. Hope you've learned something today, and I hope to see you on the water really soon.